Okay, so I read up on Leibniz and basically had a mystical experience where I was in like total ecstasy of it's just the ecstasy of knowledge. And I was a committed Leibnizian for about an hour or so. I mean, there's still traces of it left, but I just have to say Leibniz is amazing. I love Leibniz. His vision of the world is just it's magical and wonderful. It's like the pot of gold at with all the leprechauns and the fairies, and yeah, I love Leibniz. I would get rid of the whole God thing. Let's like invert the God thing and also the whole optimism thing. But other than that, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I tried to basically
What did you say you were reading?
Leibniz.
What of him? Was something in particular or just about him, or?
Oh no, it was like what was I specifically reading?
Yeah.
So it was actually I started off watching a video. It was Arthur Holmes, his kind of like series on the history of philosophy. So I watched that and was taking notes, but then it ended in basically like 3 hours of me trying to create like a process Leibniz philosophy. And then I realized I was basically just like trying to do what Whitehead was doing. And yeah, it was interesting. That's basically was my day yesterday. Story of my life right there. Yeah, I think I failed though, because I'm not laser brained like Whitehead, and Leibniz is like ultra laser brained. I don't even know what adjective you'd even use, but yeah.
Well, so I guess getting into the text. So this is our last seminar on Bergson. So sad, to quote Trump, sad. I like this. So was it Chase or someone said that he taught ancient philosophy? I think.
Yeah, Bergson, he did.
And you can really see that out, talking especially about Aristotle. I mean, he actually kind of cleared some things up. Well, I don't know about cleared, but gave me some really interesting ways to think about Aristotle. But I found this pretty fascinating, and especially the comments about Kant. I mean, he seemed to really like Kant, except that, I had to put it crudely and probably inaccurately, he seems to think that Kant may have been on the right track, except that he did not allow for an intuition of the what would I call, what we would call it, the will of duration. And that, impression I got is he thinks that's what generated the noumena, was that Kant's unwillingness to include an intuition of the real into his philosophy. So I thought that was pretty cool. But I'm still not, even at this late stage, like in the last part of the book, I still don't really understand what he thinks philosophy should do. So on page 342, he's talking at the bottom about intuitive knowledge. And it is just a little bit up from the bottom, it is within becoming that it would have transported us by an effort of sympathy. This is a second kind of knowledge. We should no longer be asking where a moving body will be, what shape a system will take, through what state a change will pass at a given moment. The moments of time, which are only arrests of our attention, would no longer exist. It is the flow of time, it is the very flux of the real that we should be trying to follow. And then on the next page, he says this other knowledge at the top, this other knowledge, if it's possible, is practically useless. It will not extend our empire over nature. It will not even go against certain natural aspirations of the intellect. It will even go against them. But if it succeeds, it is reality itself that it will hold in a firm and final embrace. And he says, we may open a perspective on the other half of the real. And the last sentence in that paragraph, to intellect, in short, there will be added intuition. But I still don't know what all that means, because, you know, he seems to be in that camp of people who say that anything you express in language is going to be bound by concepts and as a product of the intellect. And so, you know, he talks about, we need to do this real metaphysics. And real metaphysics is, you know, he uses words like installing ourselves in duration. And that's how you do real metaphysics. But, you know, what does that mean in terms of philosophy? Since I'm guessing philosophy is something you have to use the intellect to express. And so, it seems like he's suggesting there's some way, maybe integrate is the wrong word, but at least bring an intuition of duration back into metaphysics. And I guess I just still don't really know what that means. I don't know what philosophy is supposed to look like, according to Bergson. So that's my huge question at the end.
So I definitely agree that there's kind of part of the problem with this is that, no matter what we actually, declare in our philosophy, we're going to be using essentially immobilities, according to Bergson at least. We're going to be using symbols, and these things are, going to be snapshots and whatnot. So I think the problem, so he's saying that, we're kind of relegated to these imperfections of language, that language, takes snapshots of these things. But it's kind of like the inspiration of those snapshots is what matters and gives a certain kind of quality to the language or the snapshots. So the way you can think of it is that, there could be some kind of a philosopher who's just shut up in a room their entire life, and they only ever just read other philosophers, and they compose their own philosophy by just simply reading other philosophers and their ideas, and kind of using what's immanent within those ideas to make their own. That could be contrasted with someone who gets philosophy and inspiration for philosophy by actually engaging with the world, by actually living and having kind of intuitive moments where they realize something about, perception or the flow of time or something like that. And then they come up with ideas based off of those experiences, or kind of in concert with those experiences and those realizations of an intuitive nature, rather than just simply working within like the immanent dialogue about those experiences as they would get like by reading Kant or whatever. So that's kind of the way I see it, is that he's saying by actually kind of engaging, kind of in a way, kind of bracketing our beliefs and just kind of going into experience and paying attention to it. I mean, it sounds like a Husserl and, phenomenology or whatever, but I think there's something kind of to that. Basically by, this kind of sympathy going into something, that actually gives us a real kind of inspiration for being able to transmit a certain quality and a certain novelty of concepts themselves, even if those concepts still have the same limitations that all concepts have, and that they're not directly capturing, the flow of reality and all these things.
Did he ever expand on what his conception of duration, or like what his metaphysics kind of eventually distilled to in his later works?
You know, I so in I think this is probably, yeah, so basically it's like the whole contraction detention thing. I think it kind of makes sense to me, but it's like he hasn't really formulated it in enough detail to like really flesh it out. I'm not sure if he does that somewhere else. So I know he has the book that's like what is it, like an introduction to metaphysics or something like that, like the creative mind. It's kind of like a compilation of later stuff about metaphysics and whatnot. He may have something in there, but I think in creative evolution it's kind of like probably his most detailed formulation of these ideas. So actually on page 340 at the top there, I think he's got something, and also somewhat on 339. I think he describes their really, that's a really good description of, it's really summing up, I guess, exactly what he's saying about how evolution, life, creativity, and time are connected. And then indeed, life is basically time. And that's basically what he's saying there. And I think that's one of the best summaries of his kind of overall what he's saying here. I think this is one of the best summaries of it right there, when he's basically saying, so he's talking, of course, about, like these artificially isolated systems. Let's see. This duration may not be the fact of matter itself, but that of the life which reascends the course of matter. So it's the duration that is the life which reascends the course of matter. That's basically, the vital impetus. So indeed, it is duration. The two movements are nonetheless mutually dependent upon each other. The duration of the universe must therefore be one with the latitude of creation, which can find place in it. So indeed, is connecting all those concepts there: duration, life as, the evolution being life that reascends the course of matter, in some kind of a mutual dependency with matter, or the movement of matter. So there, and also kind of the way he sets it up before then, I think that really kind of sums up what's going on, like with his overall point of view. Although there's also hints of it towards like the very, very end when he's critiquing Spencer.
This is a little bit of a side point, but I'm still struggling with the relation between space and time and those sorts of things, and I can't remember where he says it in this last section, and he's said similar things before, but he seems to explicitly attribute or say that space is a feature of matter. And I was, because I was thinking that this flow of duration was sort of responsible for the emergence of space and time, both. And maybe it is in some sense. But now, what I'm getting the sense of now, from what Chase said and from what I read, is that space is what happens when duration pushes through matter, and so, so that the sort of the fundamental flow is temporality in some sense. And I don't really know I've never understood what Heidegger means by that, but this keeps recurring in phenomenology, that this notion that time and being are inextricably connected. And so somehow, whatever this duration is, it is, this temporal not time as in the big space-time box, but this temporal emergence of the real, and that when it cuts, I don't know how to say it, when it moves through or cuts through this other movement of matter. I mean, he uses these words like matter descending and life ascending. So like these two movements are kind of moving through each other, and that the essence of duration seems to be this temporality, and then spatiality seems to be what happens when that temporality, that essential temporal movement, encounters is not the right word, but when it moves through whatever this downward materiality is. And so that the essence of being, you know, is somehow temporality. And I don't really know what that means. You know, I can say those words, but that something like that seems to me to be going on. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I think what he's saying is I somewhat forgot what I was gonna say. Yeah, someone else talk, sorry.
I have a potential solution and further complication. Because Reeser, you've asked a good question, I think. I know that my word as to whether or not your questions are good doesn't matter, but I appreciate you asking it because, okay, your question as to duration being this temporality of being interacting with this sort of ascension of spatiality, or spatiality being the result of this ascending matter conflicting or interacting with this duration and matter coming together and creating spatiality and temporality. That, I think, for me, that is a very difficult to grasp idea. And I have a much more elementary question that I think might help us get there. I mean that. And I mean, because I know that everybody in this group has, or at least I have, a very limited attention span. So I mean, hopefully I'll remember to continue the line of questioning. But the first thing I want to know, before I can fully grasp whether temporality as a force on being interacts with the movement of materiality against life and time to form spatiality in this interaction. Before I can understand that, there's something I have to understand. And seriously, it's a really elementary question. Hopefully we'll be able to answer it easily. But I collected a few quotes that pointed me to this question I have, that is, what is Bergson's final word on determinacy and on freedom and causality? Okay, and that maybe that's an even more complex question, but I want to start by saying, like, I think that he's on the side of this sort of freedom, this duration, but I want to know why. I feel like I need it to be clarified, because, okay, well, let's look at some things, okay? So on page 339, page 339, a few lines up from the very bottom of the page, he starts with this line of questioning. This line of questioning about succession and the velocity of time. And I think that'll start us in the right direction. He says, in succession, insofar as distinct from mere juxtaposition if succession has no real efficacy, if time is not a kind of force, why does the universe unfold successive states with a velocity, which in regard to my consciousness is a veritable absolute? So he's asking, I guess, why is there some consistent velocity? Why with this particular velocity rather than any other? Why not with an infinite velocity? Why, in other words, isn't everything given at once, like on the film of a cinematograph? The more I consider this point, the more it seems to me that if the future is bound to succeed the present, instead of being given alongside of it, it is because, and this is the kicker, the future is not altogether determined at the present moment, and that if the time taken up by this succession is something other than a number, if it has for the consciousness that is installed in it absolute value in reality, it is because there is unceasingly being created in it, not indeed in any such artificially isolated system as a glass of sugared water, and this is on the next page, but in the concrete whole of which every such system forms part, something unforeseeable and new. And those are really important words for me, because then I'm going to continue this. I have two other quotes that I'm pulling from. On 341, he starts his, there's no particular line that I'm going to necessarily point to, but throughout the entire page, and I can point to a couple of them, throughout the entire page, he describes this argument of the virtue of an event, the concept of an event having virtue or meaning or substance only because of the temporality that it is attached to, meaning like the creation of a painting. He describes it by comparing like a child piecing together a collage or a puzzle. That can be hurried. You can rush that, or you can slow down, whatever, and you'll get the same result. It's an action that takes some time, a variable amount of time. But the painting, the creation of a painting or the drawing of a picture, the temporality directly impacts the meaning and the virtue and the reality of the event itself. The amount of it, it doesn't matter how much time is spent, but the amount of time spent will ultimately determine, or the time's interaction with it will ultimately determine or impact the result, in a way that's not like a puzzle. You know what I mean? And he describes this as an illusion no doubt, but an illusion that is natural, ineradicable, and that will last as long as the human mind. And basically, my point, the reason I bring up 341 and this whole long argument about the continuity of interpenetration of time and it being irreducible to instantaneous juxtapositions in space, right? It leads me to believe, okay, yeah, events are given virtue by their succession, right? And therefore, it is impossible to predict the outcome of an event. Sure, it's impossible to predict or to foresee the outcome of an event. You know what I mean? But does that unforeseeability and unpredictability, does that equate to indeterminacy? Not entirely. You know what I mean? Like, Reeser, you're a big fan of determinism. You get what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, he's arguing, yes, we can't predict anything in the future, but does that mean that the future, like, does God know what's going to happen next? You know what I mean? Like, and then
No.
Okay, so and then the only last thing I was going to bring up was just a small note on we don't even have to turn to it, but on 346, when he's talking about Spinoza and Leibniz, he refers to their mechanism, and he has a quick line that I thought was important. He said, following the second, on the contrary, he would have been led to all the consequences which the intuition of true duration implies, which was this inability to grasp a mechanism or to fall in line with a mechanism as a dogmatism rather than as a methodology or something, or like a method for understanding. So my point is, it seemed to me the whole time like he convinced me very thoroughly that we can't predict the future, but he did not maybe it's because I need it to be explained to me very, very simply or something, but I was not immediately convinced that that there's absolute novelty in a shattering of causality in events, or like a new form of causality and cause and effect relationships where even God couldn't know what's going to happen next. You know what I mean? Like the Aristotelian conundrum, where it's like, is there going to be a sea battle tomorrow? If you say yes or no, one of them is true already, and we don't know. We'll never know which one until it happens. But it's true. It's true or false. You know what I mean? At least that's what Aristotle was saying, I think. And so I get that we can't predict it, but is it actually free, indeterminate, radical novelty in each moment? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I think this portion here at the bottom of 339, this kind of set a light bulb off for me. But I think what is going on, so I don't think he would say that you can't necessarily predict things and that some things are more relatively determined than other things. But I think he sees those relative degrees of determinism as different from creation and novelty, which is also being itself and whatnot. So basically what he's saying is, okay, so this part, he builds up this whole idea, this is what science does. It treats time as, a independent variable. And it perceives time, as like a timeline, as the space that it moves through, and that we visualize time based off of the past, of things already created and moments that have already occurred. And then we represent those things to ourselves in our mind spatially, that they're juxtaposed with each other. And the problem is that we don't make a proper separation or distinction between things that have already occurred, that have already happened, already been created, and what is being created now in the present and that will be created in the future. So I think what's going on there is basically saying, I think the best way to really think of this philosophy in general, or process philosophy, is to think the future doesn't exist. Get all of your ideas of the future and basically like get rid of them. So, but what he's really responding to here is saying that, okay, this method of dealing with time as an independent variable cannot account for the actual experience we have of reality itself, in the sense that, I can have a totally different experience of duration, of this subjective durational experience, but it still follows the same function of this, quantitative independent variable of time. It would still follow the same thing, and there would be no difference, that you could even theoretically perceive it all at once in this complete simultaneity, and that would still make zero difference to the mathematical formulation of it. But he's basically saying, okay, so then why do we have to have this succession? Why does it matter that I have this actual duration, this subjective particular duration, rather than having everything just given to me all at once? Why do I have to wait for the sugar to actually dissolve? So basically, that's kind of the background he's setting this up. And he says basically it's because the future necessarily is bound to succeed the present instead of being given alongside. So basically, because the future actually doesn't exist, that's why we have to go through succession. That's why there's duration, because it's still being created in the moment. It's not yet created. It's not actually real yet. And that's why the future is not given for us in the same way that you can create a kind of mathematical equation, and you can predict things based off those equations, but only by doing that with abstract events, essentially, with abstract entities that are immobilities and whatnot. So basically, that's what he's really saying is that, yes, because you can't have any kind of an absolute knowledge of the whole of the future, but you can have predictions of isolated events, of basically what the methodology of science is able to isolate and to quantify. So those things you could predict. But the whole of these things, all their relations kind of bound up with each other, that's something that can't be put into symbols, it can't be quantified, and it can't be predicted in the same way that, he uses this this metaphor of art, of creating art. I think that's very apt metaphor, to show that basically, yeah, you can somewhat predict it relatively, but ultimately, even the painter doesn't know exactly how it's going to turn out because it's not given yet. It's basically like, okay, we have these, maybe something that you can see as different elements, and they have these tendencies, and we can relatively predict what's going to happen within among these elements and whatnot. But if they're real elements and these are real events, there's going to be some kind of infinitesimal degree that can't be put into a symbol, that can't be captured by quantification, and that's not going to be able to be predicted. So there'll always be something that remains unpredictable to some degree. So I think that's basically what's going on. Okay, so one thing though I have to say, because so in his critique about nothing, he says, basically the idea of nothing is, totally confused. But then on 341, he talks about it as duration, as a kind of unforeseeable nothing. So he says, but the concrete solution brings with it that unforeseeable nothing, which is everything in a work of art. And it is this nothing that takes time. So that is interesting because, so the idea of nothing that I like is more just, this is what escapes symbolization. This is what escapes representation. And that's what he's really saying duration is. Duration is this kind of slipperiness of just the raw experience of life itself. The real ultimately escapes these things to the point where it's not a thing. It's nothing, but it's just the totality of the real in its process of creation. And also the reason that he's saying, why can't these things, be just given all at once? Because if you think about it, basically the form of the duration, the quality of the duration taking place in something, to change that in some way would actually change what occurs in it. So basically there's, between like form and matter, I think he's saying basically, science would like to say that, that you can predict all these things and you can see them as, like the block universe, like Minkowski's, block universe, or even Einstein, who, takes Minkowski's ideas. And you can see, succession is an illusion. There's the past, the present, the future are all there given at one time. And basically the way that we separate them, past, present, and future, is totally arbitrary because it's all given there, right there. And that's why you see there's a tendency to see time almost as a kind of spatial dimension because of that. And he's saying basically that that's a kind of separation of form and matter, where they're saying like, okay, the form as this, quantified spatial extension kind of stuff, that's what matters, literally matter. And the form of it, that, which is, you can see as time, that doesn't really actually matter. But what he's saying is that you can't, to change the form temporally, the actual way that it unfolds in duration and experience, to change that would change the matter also. So hopefully that makes sense. At least the idea of him talking about it as form, and if you the way that you can't actually change the form without changing the matter of it, that if you speed up the duration where you're experiencing things, at lightning speed, that would actually change the experience itself, which would change reality itself, even though you could still have some kind of a, like a scientific mathematical theory talking about some kind of prediction within it, as if time doesn't really matter. But what he's saying is time does matter. Yeah.
So, one thing, I think that not there, or the nothing on page 341, a couple of sentences later, he says, so the concrete solution brings with it that unforeseeable nothing, which is everything in a work of art. And it is this nothing that takes time, not as matter, like N-O-U-G-H-T, not N-O-T. And so, the way I read that was that, like, what he's saying, that he's consistent with what he said earlier, in that the not is not the absence of everything, it is matter, like something like prime matter, I guess. I mean, I don't know that I want, but anyway, it's like, as if, I don't think he thinks any such thing could actually exist, but not as matter. It creates itself as form. And so, that's why, on this comment I made, it almost seems to me that he thinks of matter as something like pure determination, and life and consciousness as pure indetermination, and that those are abstract potentialities that never actually exist in those forms, but that the world of being is this, I don't know what word to use, intermixing encounter between pure determination and pure indetermination. There's some, again, I've been trying to find it, haven't been able to find it, where in this last section, he suggests something like that if there was nothing but matter, if there was no life, then you would have a purely calculable, purely spatial universe. But that it's that when you bring life and consciousness in with matter, then that life and consciousness introduces indetermination. And earlier in the book, we got this sense that's not there's sort of a continuum. At one extreme, you have something closer to pure matter, like rocks, and then you have stuff that's closer to pure life, life like consciousness, but that there is no pure matter or pure consciousness, but that everything is somewhere on this spectrum. And so the way I see it, the way I'm thinking is that if you did have pure matter without any life, and you probably couldn't have such a thing, I'm guessing he would say, at least not in this universe, but then you would have pure determination that would be purely calculable. But that when you have this movement of duration and life pushing through, or whatever it is, matter, you're always going to have this indeterminate activity. And the more life or consciousness there is, the more indeterminacy. And so that with consciousness, you probably, I would think on his view, you have the maximum degree of indeterminacy. And that's evident in high, our consciousness, where we have a great variety of choices, a great amount of indetermination available. So that, that's kind of the way I see those two. But as far as like what that means in terms of freedom, I don't know that actually ever translates into something like free will in a radical sense, like abstract, absolute free will. I remember getting this sense when we read, some of us read Time and Free Will as well, that there's still sort of a compatibilism here, in that freedom is always, and I'm kind of thinking almost like Sartre's facticity, that there's going to be determinate factors always that are, I'm thinking he would chalk up to matter. And then you've got indeterminate duration trying to push freedom. And then what you end up with in a conscious being like us is a being that has some degree, some range of possibilities within the constraints of this this materiality. So that's like, something like maybe like Sartre's facticity, where, you have freedom, but within the constraints imposed upon you by, I'm not omnipotent. In other words, I can't do anything I want to do. But then I also, I'm, in terms of how that cashes out in terms of like actual human free will, I keep coming back to this thing that Hunter said a long time ago. And I don't know if Hunter was stealing this from someone else, but you said something like, I can make a free choice, but I only realized it was free after the fact. And so, that maybe what happens is my freedom is I am making choices within the context of this matter invested consciousness, but it's not like I am some subject, like a Cartesian subject that then says, I choose to do this. It's just the manifestation of duration as my consciousness sort of introduces a certain amount of indeterminacy into this world.
So earlier, he does say that absolute freedom is an abstraction in the same way that a absolute kind of duration would be, and also that absolute spatiality would also be just an abstraction. But yeah, I wonder at the same thing in terms of a kind of like a continuum of degrees and whatnot here, because in one sense he's saying that these things are composites, that they're mixes, and it's interesting that he seems to praise the composites of the ancients and the way that they talked. So he talks about Aristotle's concepts of form and of Heil, of matter, that they still had some degree of what the modern since Descartes would see as separate, that they had composites in their ideas. Let's see, where's I think I can find it. Yeah, so on 350 he says basically the psyche of Aristotle, the psyche, the soul, is less spiritual than our soul. Basically, our concept of soul, like the Cartesian concept of soul, it is because his soma, body, already impregnated with the idea, is less corporeal than our body. So he's saying that these things are composites, and he says that also about the concept of matter itself, of Heil in Aristotle, that there's other elements in it. So I think this is interesting, considering the fact that kind of his critique of this kind of ancient metaphysics, and Leibniz does the same thing. He has a kind of continuum and a hierarchy of monads, with the very top basically being God, which is like a kind of like absolute knowledge and absolute relationality and whatnot, down to these bare monads that are basically just spatial extension, or what actually composes spatial extension. But anyways, he seems to have some kind of an emanation idea himself, in the sense of there's just like this one duration, or the movement of duration consciousness, but then in its varying movements, it kind of creates something of a continuum by its occasional disruption. Basically, these disruptions of it create matter. And that's the part that I have trouble understanding, him talking about these like inverted movements that create matter. I think that's probably the hardest part that we're all having, is trying to understand how these inversions of movements kind of create these two different things, matter and life or whatnot. Because it seems to me almost like I don't know, it's like my instinct tells me to think of it basically almost like a Neoplatonism, where everything is kind of like emanating out of this like perfect duration consciousness, but clearly that's not really what he's trying to get at. But yeah, that's my answer.
I'll give Hunter a little jolt here and think of maybe sort of a bad Hegelian interpretation. Bad because I don't know Hegel that well, so I'll probably say something stupid. But that's when I talk about matter as being pure determination and life or consciousness being pure indetermination. I'm thinking of that kind of the way I think of pure difference with Deleuze, and that it doesn't, you can't, pure difference makes no damn sense, because in order for there to be difference, there have to be things. And so pure difference is this sort of metaphysical, I don't know what, abstraction that's trying to express something that can't exist in the normal way we think of existence. And so I'm thinking of pure indeterminacy and pure determination in a similar kind of way. Maybe that's the sort of abstract metaphysical principles. And then maybe it's some sort of dialectical thing, because I'm trying to keep, I know, and apparently some people think that Bergson failed in maintaining an ontological monism, but I'm trying to somehow preserve an ontological monism that nevertheless preserves these two poles. And so maybe there's some sort of dialectical thing going on here between pure determination and pure indetermination. And then the universe is the manifestation of that dialectical tension.
I'm going to shock the world. Well, get ready, because, well, two things actually. I have a question. Just before I wanted to make a point. The reason that it'll be shocking is because I'll say something slightly complimentary towards Carl Jung. But Chase, how do you read the words that are in the Greek? Because when I see them, I just hear like TV static. I can't read them. You were saying it's Soma and Eidos, and I read Eidos, but I can't read them.
Yeah, you just have to learn the Greek alphabet. It's not really as hard as you think. Although I noticed there was
years of Greek, and so I don't remember much, but I remember how to pronounce the words.
Yeah, there was an error actually in the book which kind of confused me. I think about the word Soma. They made the sigma look like an O, like an Omicron, which confused me at first until I realized that was supposed to be a sigma. But yeah, I think, but they're just kind of, sort of elementary Aristotelian kind of forms that are actually, it's basically just the Greek translations of words that we would use, like matter and whatnot. And with the Greek alphabet, I can pretty much figure it out that way. Yeah, I still have to look up. I mean, I don't know Greek, but I just learned the alphabet, and that was enough to get me through.
Well, I appreciate that. My only problem with that, and this is the last word I'll say about it. This is my complaining, is that I can't Google it. I can't just write like, oh, it looks kind of like this. I don't know. I can't take a picture of it. Either way, it's like looking at a drawing that I am supposed to have a sound related to. It's totally not in my. Okay, either way. Point. Moving on. I think you're describing something, Nevitt, that when you talked about. Okay. Well, first off, I would like to kind of qualify this by saying that I'm not totally educated on this idea, nor am I totally sold on it yet, but I learned about it recently. And I also want to, like, after I say this, I want to say a few things about, or just one thing, I think, about Bergson and Hegel. But because I have it's my job, you know, but I think, Nevin, you described something that was that I learned about recently, I think. So you describe pure indeterminacy, right? The movement of life and consciousness. And this pure determinacy as these metaphysical absolutes that exist in tension, right? And pure determinacy being matter. The two of them as these poles that exist contradictory to one another. That reads a lot to me like a concept by Carl Jung. And I think it's called, let's see, it's called it's called an alchemical relationship, called the transcendent function. Chase, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's kind of like the coincidence of opposites.
Yes.
Yeah, the transcendental function is what synthesizes the opposites into a third thing, I guess. I don't probably not call it a thing, but yeah.
And now the reason that I point to that is because it's kind of like it's what people accuse Hegel of doing. You know what I mean? It's what people point their finger at Hegel and say you're just it's what Russell even started the whole thing, but not started, but did the whole. You just have thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis, and you just move up into this tree of being towards ultimate reality or something. And I think that I think that Hegel would turn in his grave if he caught me, you know, preaching that or saying that was something that he actually really, you know, strongly believed. This thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing is like the actual structure of the dialectic, because the dialectic is insane. It's very hard to describe. It's not just a thesis, antithesis, synthesis. But what I do think is like a thesis, antithesis, synthesis is Jung's transcendental function, where it's not exactly like the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, where you have a concept being overtaken and destroyed by another concept, which is then kind of sublimated or rejoined with some of the elements of the first concept, and they create this third new thing, right? But it's rather that two polar opposites, two concepts, like pure indeterminacy and pure determinacy, exist at the same time together in a shared event or occurrence, and they exist in a relationship of pure tension. And that alone, that relationship of pure tension, as it is retained or as it exists, produces a new thing. And I guess if you freeze that thing, that third thing, and you take it apart, you could find all of the, or maybe not, but you could dissect it like an animal and find the pure determinacy and the pure indeterminacy. But then you unfreeze time and you let it go back to living its life, and it's this third thing. It's this new identity between this tension between pure indeterminacy and pure determinacy, creating this new thing in what Jung calls an alchemical relationship, which is just really trippy and new agey to me, but I really want to figure it out because it's interesting. But before I shut up, because I will, I wanted to just kind of say that at the later parts of this book, or of this chapter, when he's critiquing Kant specifically, I think that he's been secretly doing it the whole text through, but I think he really kicked it up in the Kant part where he's doing like what Ponty did to critique Sartre. He's kind of implicitly saying like, oh, you know, followers of Descartes, not looking at anybody, but they would say something ridiculous like this. Could you believe it? I think that every single time that he described a post-Kantian philosophy, I mean, yes, it included things like Fichte and Schelling and so on, but he explicitly names Fichte. But he never mentions Hegel in the entire book, you know, or at least as far as I can remember. He never once drops Hegel's name. And I was shocked, because the whole time I was like, this sounds exactly like Hegel. This sounds great. This is all. It seems like Bergson seems like he has certain ideas that are present in Hegel's thoughts, or at least begun to be talked about in some of Hegel's thoughts. But I think I recognized where Bergson split off from Hegel, and I now, correct me if I'm wrong, or just ignore this because this is just me posturing, I guess, to some extent. But I think that he critiques these post-Kantian philosophies, and I wish I'd have written it. Well, actually, I guess I wish I'd have written down like exactly where it is. But he starts talking in the section labeled the Kantian criticism about post-Kantian philosophy as yes. Okay, here it is. Okay. So basically, all I'm saying, he says that he disagrees with post-Kantian philosophy because he feels that post-Kantian philosophy, though it does attempt to reconcile with the ideas of becoming and progress and evolution and so on, he's, and I think he's just kind of secretly talking about Hegel. And so I'm just going to assume that he's talking about Hegel. He's saying that, hey, like he talks about becoming and progress and evolution and so on, but he questions these, and this is on page 362. I'm going to just go on page 362. We can talk about it. He says, does duration really play a part in it? Real duration is that in which each form flows out of previous forms, while adding to them something new, and is explained by them as much as it explains them. But to deduce this form directly from one complete and then capital B being, which it is supposed to manifest, is to return to Spinozism. It is, like Leibniz and Spinoza, to deny the duration to all efficient action. The post-Kantian philosophy, severe as it may have been on the mechanistic theories, accepts from mechanism the idea of a science that is one and the same, all kinds of reality. And it is nearer to mechanism than it imagines, for though in the consideration of matter, enlightened thought, it replaces the successive degrees of complexity that mechanism supposed by degrees of the realization of an idea or by degrees of the objectification of a will. It still speaks of degrees, and these degrees are those of a scale which being traverses in a single direction. Now here's, and I'm just going to assume that he's Nevin, thank you for the link. That's interesting. That's fantastic. I hadn't even, I should Google things before I say them to find evidence, but thank you for doing it for me. I'm going to read that. But I'm going to assume that he's talking about Hegel here, like critiquing Hegel by saying, look, I think this is what he's saying. I think he's saying, look, Hegel is a smart guy and he's all into becoming and motion, and that's great. But the problem with Hegel is that this becoming, this motion, this evolution is moving towards some absolute, some final, totalizing, complete unity, this absolute knowing, the absolute idea. He's under the impression that Hegel's dialectic is this like inevitable, rigorous, absolute path of conquest in concepts, marching forward towards the like perfection or the ultimate idea or absolute knowing or absolute idea. And I don't think that's the case with Hegel. I think that Hegel's ideas are not necessarily totalizing in that sense. I think that Hegel's ideas are not, Hegel's dialectic at least, the dialectic is not this rigid thing that has this absolute like there's only one path on a dialectic and it's heading towards the truth, you know, because he has several concepts that he describes in philosophy of right, like about law and crime and so on, that he starts with law or he starts with crime, and he does it like 5 or 6 times where he's like, let's just go on a dialectical path with this and let's follow the self-movement of this concept. And they like one concept like crime or law or something can have like 7 or 8 different dialectical paths that all move forward and all are valuable and all need to be investigated in some sense. You know, I mean, whether something is or isn't valuable, it gets into predicates and subjects, and that's like really complicated. But it's also not like totally arbitrary, because because Hegel is trying to be explicitly like, this is the self-movement of this concept as it is existent in determinations of thought, not just like what I think of after I think of like a flower. I don't just think of like a honeybee or like a seed, and then like that's the next step because I'm just ad-libbing. It's like the concept self-movement. And so there's this sort of in-between between like a hardcore, rigid, absolute, totalizing structural system and just totally arbitrary ad-libbing. And that's where I think Hegel is. But I think that it's totally reasonable to assume that Bergson was kind of convinced or kind of felt, as many people have and still do, have felt or feel that Hegel is sort of an authoritarian and is saying like there's one righteous path towards the absolute, towards absolute knowing, and the dialectic is perfect, and there's only one way, and it's my way or the highway, And I think that's what he's saying when he says that the problem is that these degrees are those of a scale which being traverses in a single direction. You know what I mean? And yeah, I guess, a common understanding. And also, I'll admit, Hegel didn't make it easy because he said stupid stuff like the rational is real. And then he's like, why does everybody think I'm a rationalist? Why would everybody think I'm a rationalist when I'm saying that everything is rational? That's crazy. Like, either way, that's what I think. And I think that I'm starting, if we can kind of take that Jungian thing and this notion of dialectical tension towards this determinacy and this indeterminacy, I'm trying to relate that now towards just the concepts of the movement up and the movement down of materiality and of life and consciousness, and how duration kind of fits into that, and what we're supposed to do with that as philosophers. Because in response to your earlier question, by the way, as to what philosophy is going to do, I wanted to kind of cheat and read the last page, because he says it kind of explicitly. He says, it is within the evolutionary movement that we place ourselves in order to follow it to its present results. Instead of recomposing these results artificially with fragments. Such seems to be the true function of philosophy. That's on page 369. And that's what I would say he thinks is the true function of philosophy, I suppose, is going back to kind of, or installing ourselves in the evolutionary movement, which
What the hell does that mean, though, really?
I guess that's what I'm saying. I don't know.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I mean, I saw that phrase there at the end too, but when he says, I mean, again, there's those words, installing ourselves. I don't know really what that means. And then, like I was saying earlier, if you're going to actually write philosophy, at some point you have to figure out how to make words, which is the intellect, which is always kind of falsifies stuff. So I'm still confused.
I don't know how helpful this will be, but I've just been thinking about those two experiences that he talks about with the child making the puzzle, recreating the puzzle, and the artist making a painting. And to me, like he talks about how that duration, that time in which the child is making the puzzle is getting faster and faster. Like the duration is being like sped up in a sense, like the time is getting faster, which I think I could relate to in like a phenomenological kind of perspective of like just time moving faster, especially as you grow older and kind of, perhaps grow in intellect, develop your intellect. Time kind of gets faster because you're kind of seeing, you're seeing these things and connecting them and making kind of recreating the puzzle pieces with what you're perceiving, and I don't think that makes it any clearer what we should do, but I do kind of sense this idea of the way that philosophy and science is going right now. Time is speeding up. Like we are kind of losing a sense of our actual experience and speeding up and kind of maybe even just getting closer, like moving to death as fast as possible, with like a sense of comfort rather than a sense of what's actually going on. And yeah, I don't know, but it makes me think that this kind of idea that he has of duration and of experiencing things like this and creating a philosophy, in a sense, would slow down time, would allow us to kind of see things as they're happening rather than, kind of constantly want to be over with it so that we can go and analyze what had happened before. And this race to be done with it so that we can then analyze it is just making time go by faster and faster, to the point to where we're just going to hit the end of it, hit the end of the evolutionary path that is intellect, and then be done, and that this is kind of a warning to those people who are in such a rush to finish, in such a rush to get to the end, to have some kind of puzzle that we can recreate till the end of the world. And this is, just questioning kind of like the path that we're going. I don't think that he has any sense of what philosophy should be, but he does have a sense of what it should not be. And that's what, he's arguing. I'm just thinking that maybe he doesn't need the answer. He doesn't need to have a conclusion or something else, because he has kind of stated what it shouldn't be. And if we know what it shouldn't be, then we can just kind of keep moving forward and find new things. I guess I don't think there is an answer, but in the process of kind of defining what things shouldn't be, it's maybe more of an authentic approach rather than finding out what things should be. And finding what things should be, or having some kind of conclusion, ends up separating us from duration in some sense. It ends up speeding up time, and the more we try to find this conclusion, the more we look for the answer or look for the end of a puzzle in creating it, the faster time goes, the further away we get from duration, and kind of the further we get from a philosophy that I think he appreciates, that I could also imagine appreciating, but I don't know what that would look like. Yeah. And I do, Alex. I do think that.
So I've wondered about that too, the whole idea of, because this is, I think psychological experiments have shown, a lot of adults do perceive time as going faster than children do. So my kind of theory on that has to do basically, okay, so a baby when it's first born has more neural connections going on than what an adult has. And they're basically just a bunch of potential developments. They have everything there. And basically this baby, by learning from its environment, basically, and what it ends up using, it kind of keeps, and what it doesn't use, it just kind of fades away. So you lose nerve cells because you don't really use them. So basically, one example is learning a language. When everyone around you is speaking this language, your brain will kind of adapt to finding differentiations within the actual sounds of that language versus other languages. And that's why it's easy for you to tell subtle differentiations within your own language instead of other languages, where it may seem like they're just saying the same thing, you can't tell the difference. So this is something kind of like what's happening in experience of time, in the sense that the child doesn't yet have this abstract, everything filtered into known elements that are coordinated into a belief system and all these things. And because of that, it's constantly picking up new information. It's not yet filtering them. And because of that, I think there's a kind of, it's actually, in Bergson's language, is actually not contracting basically everything as much. It's more just takes it on in its full complexity, and it's just like, wow, everything is so new and crazy and magical. And when you get older and you just like, a baby looks at a goat or something, and it's just like, oh my God, that thing is amazing. What is that? And then when you're older, you just like, oh yeah, it's a goat. You have the word goat. You don't really have to care about it. Where I think something like a child would be more connected with those infinite details of particularity and experience that aren't just condensed down to this word goat. And it's just like, it just hits it. And part of that experience is basically, it's like the more detailed content, the slower that time goes. And I think it's something like that. It's kind of like what they call hedonic adaptation. That basically you get used to stuff, so you filter it out. That's why, you never look at the pictures on your refrigerator. Whenever other people go to your house, they look at those pictures and they're just like, wow, those are interesting. You're just like, well, I never noticed them. You can notice things basically in other people's houses that they don't themselves. It's the same reason. It basically has to do with attention and the way that attention is filtered based off what you're used to and whatnot. So I think it actually goes surprisingly well with Bergson's ideas.
That makes me think that that's like a specific type of that. Like that would be a perception based kind of slowing or speeding up of time. Does that make sense? Like I sense that from like Ponty, like Merleau-Ponty would agree with you, and that Merleau-Ponty was kind of a, let's use Bergsonian thought to analyze perception, and so I would agree with you on that. Perception affects the duration of like how we experience duration and time, but I think there are other elements to it. I think that there are other things going on, and that Bergson would believe that we could kind of infinitely explore how time affects us, or how we, well, I don't know. Because, I mean, you'd have to talk about your perception of time. So on some level, it has to be perceptual, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that is kind of a difficult one in the sense of, is he talks about a lot of perception, as catering to our future action upon the world and everything. And I definitely think he's, for the most part, right about that. And I think he would definitely say that that's part of how our experience happens, but then it's not necessarily a kind of totally determinate thing for him. And of course, in that, he says by an effort, just a kind of mental, psychological effort, we can have these changes in our own duration, that we can enter into duration, enter into movement, and kind of, just the same way, we can do the exercise again where we go into intuition and kind of try to get a sense of the actual flow of time. I think it's something like that. You can have an effort towards a different duration, that there's variability going on there. So I have a whole lot of other things I wanted to say about all the things that were said. I've got a list of 7 things in front of me, but I'm just not going to go into that. We'll see what happens.
Well,
I was going to just kind of second the connection that Travis made with Merleau-Ponty, and that he has a similar problem that we talked about. that he said there is I forgot how he put it, but a preconceptual intentionality through the body, and that is because it's preconceptual, it's not something that you can express linguistically directly, but it's a matter of experiencing, how you experience your body. And I wonder too if they've talked about the relation between those two guys, but I'm thinking that the experience of duration is something, it's similar in that regard, and that it's kind of this fundamental grounding of our experience in the world, but it's not something you can kind of bring forward into consciousness and analyze directly.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure whether to put Merleau-Ponty as kind of like a branch off of Bergson or a continuation of him. Whether or not he was kind of studying perception as this kind of this thing that is changing our perception of time, as one of many things that do that, or if perception is kind of the key to understanding duration better, and our perception of the world and our experience is kind of just inexplicably tied with duration and affects it, and so if we were able to change our perception of our experience, if we were able to change like our perception and understand that, then we would also kind of understand duration and time. We would be able to live kind of in actual time rather than kind of indefinitely speeding up because of our ability to get used to certain perceptions. Like Chase said, it's like we kind of, as we grow up, we see perceptions, and we no longer really are seeing perceptions as we see them as like a, this huge landscape, with a horizon. We see them as individual objects, and if we were able to really fully perceive things, in the way that Merleau-Ponty would suggest, then we would experience time in the way that Bergson would want us to.
I think it was William Blake who said, if the doors of perception are cleansed, you'd experience things they truly are, and you'd be able to see heaven in a wildflower and eternity in an hourglass or something like that. I can't remember what the line is, but I think that's pretty significant, that you would see that essentially that's talking about duration there. There's, when he's saying basically, there's the objective measure of the hourglass, but there's a seeming eternity in there based off of the doors of perception being cleansed, which you can see as, that's expanding the reducing valve of our perception. So I definitely think perception is part of this kind of temporal mechanism that is our own duration of experience. Because I really think it all has to come down to experience for Bergson and Merleau-Ponty, I guess, as well. Should I go on? Okay. So one thing I want to say, going back to his stuff about the post-Kantians and whatnot. So he says that they had a non-temporal intuition. So I kind of wonder if, he critiques that, of course, but I wonder why isn't that possible? Why can't we have a non-temporal intuition, or even possibly an intuition that is temporal, that actually can tell you something about the future? Because it seems like, because he talks about somewhat about prediction, but, that prediction isn't always some kind of mathematical, scientific kind of thing. Same way, if you see something flying towards your face, there's a prediction, intuitive understanding that it's going to hit your face. And I wonder if, being able to kind of somewhat metaphorically see the future is something kind of like that. It's an intuition that is it temporal? Is it non-temporal? I mean, it's kind of going out of duration or like expanding upon it. But it seems like in the same way that if, there's tendencies and a kind of weight of the past and of matter in these things that form kind of seeming repetitions, I guess probably not the right word, but seeming tendencies and things like that the same would happen for the future. And if you had a kind of intuition of those rhythms of experience and whatnot, could there be some kind of additional kind of extrapolation of that intuition to be able to see something about the future? Or is it that then that would totally destroy duration? Because exactly what he's saying is that its being is in that the fact that this future doesn't exist. So I don't know. I wonder, because I think there's something to a kind of non-temporal intuition. I'm not totally convinced by Bergson that, well, I don't know. I'm undecided. But so I started reading this book. You guys will probably think this is funny, but the Mothman Prophecies. And it's basically about a bunch of crazy paranormal stuff. And it's basically like, if one page of this stuff is true, then my entire belief system is bullshit, basically. And how could you possibly predict something about the future? A ton of people report basically having dreams that come true later on. How could we possibly make sense of that with Bergson's idea? I think possibly thinking of it as a kind of, there's sort of tendencies that don't always turn out true, but basically, he talks about dreams as kind of detentions where you're no longer, connected with the present, but you expand into the past. Why can't you possibly kind of expand into like this intuition about these tendencies that the future might be leading towards? I don't know. That's my way of trying to make sense of something like that. But yeah, I'll leave that there and see what you guys have to say about that.
Two things. First off, it's just insane that you bring up this, I know that this might, it sounds like I'm making this up, but I swear to God I can prove it. And Travis can corroborate. I have been having a series of strange experiences recently that Travis has listened to me talk about, where I've been having dreams, and little details from the dreams have been appearing in my life following. However, and that's been going on for like a month now, but it's happened like 4 different times. But yeah, at a certain point, I think it might just be recognizing patterns and like coincidences happening, or dreaming about stuff that's like I assume is going to happen or something, or dreaming about normal objects and seeing them, whatever. That's something that has happened. Seriously, I a string of blue beads that I broke in a dream that belonged to Travis, that I broke it in the dream, and it made him really mad at me, and I ran away from him in the dream. And then later on, like 2 days later in a Target, I saw the exact object, and like I heard a name, and like I heard just all these weird things have happened. But either way, I have two things to kind of respond to you, Chase, with they're actually kind of salient, potentially. First off, there is some, like you said before, there is some degree to which we can predict. Not like, yeah. I think there are certain isolated events that we can like predict, and I think that like a philosophical method is similar to it. Because tell me if I'm misunderstanding, because it seems like you're questioning like, can we have a non-temporal intuition that predicts something in a philosophical system? Because it seems like we can both agree like a scientist can evaluate a molecule and assume that molecule X is going to do action Y in the given circumstances, and those given circumstances are going to occur at this particular time. And then that particular time occurs, molecule X does action Y, and he's correct. Okay, he predicted the future, right? And I feel like that same sort of thing can happen in a philosophical system. And I mean, even as like, hell, I like Total Recall. But in a philosophical system, especially what I would say is this post-Kantian non-temporal intuition, I took that there's this really specific process that Hegel talks about, that I think in my mind I liken it often to the notion of okay, Nevin, this might interest you a little bit. You remember how you said, okay, like on page 369 when he says that we need to place ourselves within evolutionary movement and so on, install ourselves in duration and all that hoogie-doo. Well, I think, and this is just the only way that I can kind of make, the only way, or one of the ways I guess that I've made sense of it, is to liken it to something that I had to kind of understand a bit earlier, which was Hegel. And this is a part of why I don't think Hegel's a totalitarian. And it's because he has a concept that's very similar to installing ourselves in duration. And he refers to it as taking he calls them the rigid categories of the understanding. Okay, Hegel says that there are these things called the rigid categories of the understanding. And the rigid categories of the understanding are the things that we reach through propositions. And this is what Fichte described the most basic element of a philosophical demonstration as the proposition, as like a singular proposition. And Fichte likened a philosophical demonstration to like a mathematical demonstration. You know, where it's like, okay, X, therefore Y, therefore Z, you know, whatever. And that's kind of how Sartre does his philosophy a bit. But my point is that Kant kind of describes these antagonist conclusions of reason, and people are trying to figure out how do we have the most, you know, unbiased or like pure reasoning. How do we have the most pure reasoning? And Fichte says, well, we need to start with an ego and a proposition. That's as simple as we can get. But Hegel says that we can get more simple, that we can get more pure, more clean of a dialectic if we try to take a concept that's in front of us and infuse it with spirit. Infuse the rigid categories of the understanding with spirit. And the spirit for Hegel is the mind. And the mind for Hegel is synonymous with a speculative unity between opposites. Like, and I'll give you an example, Chase, of like exactly what you said. I would say there's a baseball coming at my head as quick as can be, and David Hume would come in and say, oh, tut, you have no proof that it's going to hit you in the face. Only the assumption, because of the fact that it has done so in the past, and that baseballs go very fast, and that people get hit by them all the time. You have no evidence to believe that this baseball is going to hit you in the head. But I don't have to have evidence. I have a speculative, and this is where speculation comes in. Speculative thought. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what dude, I'm tripping out this entire time we're reading. Like, it's crazy. I'm like, the whole time I've been reading this book, I've been freaking out at how, like, similar the two of them think. There is an immediate speculative unity in the mind between the baseball in front of my face and the baseball smacking into my flesh and hitting me. These two, because, okay, the baseball at this position, at this point in its duration, the baseball hitting me, it has to no longer be in somebody else's hand or in the air or something for it to hit me in the face. It has to have destroyed itself as a concept, as a flying baseball, or as a baseball about to be thrown. That baseball has to die for the baseball hitting me in the face to live. And I, for some reason, have a speculative unity between that baseball and the baseball hitting me in the face. And I'll give you a bit of a clearer example. I see a bud. I see a flower bud, like that hasn't bloomed yet, right? And I see a bloom. I see a bloomed flower, you know, right next to it. And they're, let's say they're on a rose bush. They're sitting next to each other. I have a speculative unity between the phases of a bud, like a rose bud, and a bloomed flower as being part of the same process. There is no like mathematical demonstration upon which I'm basing my argument. I mean, there's plenty of evidence if we want to talk about evidence and experience and so on and empirical stuff. But I just have a speculative unity between these concepts that destroy each other as being part of the same process. And that speculative unity, this spirit, this mind, that is what I have to interpolate facts and figures and information and new data and sensuous certainty and understanding and the progress of freedom and consciousness. I have a spirit. I have a speculative unity. And now here's the thing. He says that, and now Hegel describes this as the project of modern philosophy. He describes this is to Hegel, and this as far as Gadamer is concerned. The project of modern philosophy is to break free from the rigid categories of the understanding and liberate our thought. And the way to do that, and that comes with the determinations of things like words, which I think is the problem here with Bergson, which is why I'm scratching my head, you know, because Bergson doesn't say that we need to kind of transcend words, but Hegel says that we infuse our concepts with spirit, and basically what that means is we take the object or the concept, and we observe what is called its self-movement. And that self-movement of this concept is the product of its relationship to my spirit. And the only objects that exist, as far as we know, are objects that have a relationship with our spirit. You know what I'm saying? If I think of everything, all the things I think of are things that I have some relationship to with my spirit. And if somebody says, well, what about this thing you can't possibly conceive of? Well, then I can't conceive of it. That's, what do you mean? Like I'm dead in the water. Like I don't have any relationship to it. It's out there. I don't care about it. So we take these objects that we can conceive of and that we have a relationship with. Because of this relationship, they engage in a self-movement. And that self-movement is the dialectic. And the only way to retain that dialectic or to perform that dialectic in a way that's approaching truth, aka the absolute idea or absolute knowing, is to infuse it with spirit by seeking out the reality or the determinations of this concept, like the following steps, like flower, like bud to bloom flower, and so on. We have to decide and figure out where it's going and what the next step in the dialectic is going to be. We can't be arbitrary about it. We can't be arbitrary or dogmatic. We can't be either. We have to be this thing that is a self-movement produced by our mind, which at its end, and this is where it gets weird, in my opinion, it is our mind thinking itself in all possible determinations. Because as the self-movement is caused by our relationship to the item, right? Or the concept. So as I relate to the concept and as it performs its self-movement, the only reason that it's doing that self-movement is because of its relationship to me, because it's an object known by a knower who knows it. And so from that, I can learn about me. I can learn about my spirit. I can learn about the knownness of the known object. And that knownness comes from me. And knowing about that knownness gives me knowledge of myself. And so, and that's why investigating a concept ultimately brings us down a dialectical path towards understanding ourself, or myself, or my own spirit. And that's why he describes the dialectical pattern, or the dialectical process, as just the spirit thinking itself in all possible determinations. And the end of the dialectical line of reasoning, that's why he says you can find the whole universe in an hourglass, or eternity in a flower, or whatever, the grain of sand in a whatever. He says that you can do that. You can, the oldest and simplest, he writes this, he says the oldest and the simplest of the concepts of the ancients can be recognized and studied in order to to understand ourself, or to understand the spirit that we have. And that spirit has another name. Not only is it Geist and mind and spirit and speculative unity, but it's also called the absolute. Because for Hegel, that's it. As soon as I finish learning about this flower, I will finally understand myself. And right there, that is the moment where I will finally, for the first time, I will find truth. I will find real, undeniable truth. And that's the absolute idea. That's absolute knowing. You know what I'm saying? And I guess my point of all this is that it seems to me like a way to, like an intuitive process towards a concept, or an intuitive look at a concept. You know, it is, yeah. I think that installing ourselves in duration and studying a concept as a thing in duration is very similar to me to the concept of studying a thing as, basically, if I can use big words, $3 words, it's the same to me as thinking myself in all possible determinations of thought. Thus, or i.e., or ergo, studying a concept, recognizing the dialectical process of that concept to the end, and reaching absolute knowing. Now, I don't think that we can actually reach absolute knowing or the absolute idea ever. I don't think that we can ever do that. But I might be wrong. But either way, I think that that's an and now I think that Travis actually kind of blew a hole in that, because he was speaking about like the temporality of duration, and like the actual, like, you know, functions of practical, or not practical, but the reality of the temporal dimension of duration, wherein it's like, we need to do this because life is going by too fast and you're missing details. You know what I mean? And there's like an actual real temporality being experienced. For Hegel, this infusing things with spirit is just a kind of non-temporal intuition. Like we say, yeah, here we go. I made it full circle all by accident. A non-temporal intuition for understanding a concept in a way, I think, similar to installing ourselves in duration. That's my point. That's my whole point. And thank you for that's my TED Talk. Thank you. So I think that those non-temporal intuitions exist, and I think that that's what the kind of thing he's talking about. And that's the kind. I'm interested in those. But I was really moved by your words, Travis, on the temporality, and that's kind of, and I'm seeing kind of the disparity between the two ideas, and I wonder which one I agree with more. I think I can guess, but I don't know yet. You know.
So Hunter, as I suggested a while back, that maybe that's the title of your paper you were searching for, Hegelian elements in Bergson's creative evolution. So there's your paper.
That's actually.
Yeah, Travis already got it.
Oh, you know, actually, Nevitt, if I could make something that didn't make me want to throw up in like less than a month and like actually before October 8th, I kind of care about that. I actually kind of give a hoot about that subject. I might actually be able to write about that. That's interesting.
And you know, there are these, well, I guess that's the one, there's one primary, I don't know if they're opposites, but you know, the duration versus matter. I mean, there is a tension throughout the entire book. So it seems like that's something you might be able to mine the book for, you know, for making that, drawing out that connection.
I have a question for you, if that's okay. And now this is just a question for you based on like your kind of your street cred, you know, your position as like a you know, a real life philosopher and like a, you know, a member of the faculty at a university. In your experience, and this is just a, like, I don't have any big point to make. I'm just asking you. Have you ever had to review like grad student applications or anything like that? Have you ever had to look at that? Okay.
No, you know, there's a committee that does that, and I'm not on it. So the closest connection I have to the graduate program is that I'm authorized to teach grad courses, but that's as far as my involvement goes. So I'm not part of that decision-making process.
Then I've got to, then just give me, I want you to kind of eyeball a question for me, I guess, which kind of doesn't make sense, but if you were on the board, what length of a paper do you think I should put, like, do you think because like my last paper was like a 15-pager, and I could go in and I could fix it. If 15 pages is like what they would go,
that's a good size.
You know, it'd be good, like about 15?
Yeah, a lot of them recommend 12 to 15 pages. Some of them maybe a little more. But the one I submitted was 15. I think that's a good length.
I wouldn't go, you know, past 20, but yeah, probably 15 is a good target.
I just wanted to know if, like, if I submit 8, do I look lazy? And if I submit 16, do I look like a try-hard? You know, but okay.
Yeah.
12 to 15.
Yeah, so speaking of this stuff about, you know, Hegel and Bergson and whatnot, it sounds a lot like the common source of the two is Goethe. So he had this, you know, Goethean science, which was, it's almost kind of like a proto-phenomenological, but it's basically like a form of science in which you kind of use intuition and kind of get sort of like an intuition of the development and movement of the kind of like teleological form of what you're trying to understand. It's very kind of, I'm not describing it very well, but I could definitely see where Hegel was using it. And if you look at that, the playlist that I posted there, so it has he does 2 diagrams from Kant, one from Fichte, one from Schelling, and then Goethe, and then the very last one, it's Hegel, and he shows how Hegel uses all of those as stages, and it's pretty interesting. So I would definitely look at that, because I think that's where they were both very much influenced from, and also Schelling too, because, you know, Bergson, he took some stuff from Schelling. And I wonder if, Goethe. And, you know, there's also the whole specter of Plotinus and his concept of intuition, which I think really kind of started the whole thing. And yeah, I would go for your PhD thesis.
No, it's pronounced Goethe. Like Socrates and Goethe and Thrasymachus. You probably don't remember Thrasymachus from the Republic.
Oh yeah, I remember him. Bastard.
Yeah, actually, my ethics is pretty much Thrasymachus ethics. Like, ethics bullshit, pretty much. Anyway,
Frozen.
what's that?
You said the word frozen.
Chase said Frozen. Is this like, are we talking about the movie Frozen now?
Oh, do you
Anyway.
guys actually hear me say that?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. No, just my phone froze for a good, I don't know, like 5 seconds or so.
Goatsy. Goat cheese. Okay. Well, have we finished for the day?
Goodbye, Bergson.
No. That's sad.
Now he's relegated to the past duration.
Yes. Just a little recap on the stuff in the fall. So it sounds like you guys are planning for the literature seminar to be Wednesdays 5 to 7.
Yeah.
And I sent out an email just based on, there was a problem, but then Chase's schedule changed. And so it looks like there's not a whole lot of overlap, but one overlap was actually 5 to 7 on Fridays for most people. So that's what I'm thinking of for Schelling, is 5 to 7. And I made up a reading list. And Chase has a reading schedule. And so what I think I'll do is write up a proposed invitation for undergrads and grads and send that out to you guys for proofreading. And I'll attach the reading schedules to that as well. And then we can, you can comment on that and then probably send those out next week. Although Craig still hasn't gotten back to me on paying. He's definitely going to pay for the Kafka books, but he hasn't gotten back to me on the Schelling yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of poke at him one more time, but then I'm just going to say in the email that people will have to read that book on the Alkek electronic version, and then just hope he will buy hard copies for all of us cool people who are already in the group. So, but I'll try to at least get an answer from him one more time before I do that. So, yeah. So anything else before we adjourn until sometime in the future, which is yet to be determined? Nope. Okay. Well, I hope to see you guys, or at least hear your voices in the fall term.
Yeah, just one stupid question, but what's the exact date so I can write it on my hand? The first meeting back. Is that gonna be like a?
So I think they're different. I'm planning on part of the difference is the length of the books is much different. So yes. I'm planning on starting on, I think it's September 4th, which is the second Friday of classes. And then I think I'm gonna go through the last week of classes. I think it turned out to be 13 weeks skipping Thanksgiving. So September 4th through the first week in December, I think.
Okay. Sounds good.
And I don't know when is the other one starting? I've forgotten.
I have no idea. That's what I don't know what the date.
Chase, well, it'll be in the schedule. I'll send out.
Yeah, we'll all get emailed about it like crazy.
Yeah, except for Hunter. So, so anything?
No.
Okay. Hope to see you not too long. Bye-bye. Oh, Alex wanted to know when the Lit seminar starts.
Yeah, he let me know. He said first week of September.
Oh, okay. Okay, see you, bye.
All right, see you guys soon.